Alright, the Dunga say that Dingy, the Watuvia, Tarbata, Tamji can be Gopa said, Duvia, Mother, and then Canistuguri, Lana, Zugi, some little honey, and then some little water with honey, Yamsu Lenje, some little Yoma Biri, some little Mavasur, and then give it Choga, some little young only going to page in it, and Dusinan, Gombalet, and Tarbata Tamji can be Gopa, San Yokoba, Tokuri, Saji, on to Sumura.
Here in this text, we're looking at how to achieve this state of happiness that is lasting, uninterrupted by even a moment of suffering or pain. So to achieve this, the method is to transform our way of thinking. And the meaning of transforming our way of thinking is to develop wholesome ways of thinking, develop them so they become stronger and stronger and stronger, and become ever more habituated to wholesome or virtuous ways of thinking, and thereby break our habituation to non-virtuous or unwholesome ways of thinking. This is the method to achieve lasting, stable happiness.
Dimaze, Nara Zugi, Simki Tingi, Chuni, Sangi, Simki Tingi, Chuni, more Cabario Mares, Chibuchiga, Rashin to Tomba, Chipare said. Then Sangi Gichin Lap Manzulia, and Simja Tamjila Sangi Chilap Jugores, Sangi Tinetiba, Jugores, Dienza, Mars Sanjoba, top 2 reses, all those snakes, Namazuti, Titunama, Yamati Shirovat, Sanjokun, treasure Tasana. Sanji Guni treasure that Dijini Yermechir said, and the Riguet Chena, Lucianam, Dado Sanji, Nimpoche, said, Simja Tamja Sanji, Rigore, Sanji, Rigere, Sanji, Nimpo Rigere, Yubim Zagas, Rigore, and the Dijini, Sanji Dijina, Yerme said, Odusina, Digor Jubaran.
Wanting to achieve a state of lasting happiness, in particular the perfected state of Buddhahood, the question will arise, can I do it? Is there something within my capacity? Or is it something so exalted, so amazing? Is that beyond my ability? Well, the truth is, we all have potential to become Buddhas because we are of the same lineage as the Buddha. We have the same nature as Buddhas. The final reality, the journey, the final reality of our own mind and the mind of all the Buddhas is identical. The final reality of our minds is that it is empty of being established by way of its own nature or essence. And there's no difference in the final reality of our mind, and the mind of an ordinary being, and that of the Buddhas. And moreover, we receive the support, the assistance and guidance from the Buddhas, or what would be here referred to as the blessings from the Buddhas. This is received in the way of their enlightened activities. And this is the enlightened activities of the Buddhas are directed towards all beings to aid them to achieve or to come to realize their Buddha potential.
That didn't matter. Malona di Malasara. That didn't matter. She soon bought a reset. Simji Dundanbi Ranshin La, Dimileva Meba Masi, Simgi Kunzu Bigo, Sarik Samlang, Dimileva Mebe, and Sim Sangandu, and Gurgu Yabata, Juso yes.
On page 23, we finished with the final quotation last time, the one from Sublime Continuum. Now coming to His Holiness's commentary in the verse below, or in the paragraph below. So this is on page 23. Thus, not only is the ultimate nature of the mind unpolluted by contaminations, but the conventional entity of the mind, that is, its mere clear and mere knowing, is also unpolluted by contaminations. Therefore, the mind can become either better or worse, as it is suitable to be transformed.
Semgi dönda bir ranshin la dime leba meba reses. Chesanda nganazugi sem di deji kasen karson shuvaresne nganazugi sem ranshin gi tubyo tomba na sanyi sem ranshin tubyo tomba yidi ngwale khabar yoba jibare sonwa. Dene inzada nganazugi sem di dönda bir ranshin gi tima мяомаре семгила дөннабе рашин жубе тонбаинса дөннабе ко чанла мадёба калай мадё ранг нгвене семгиngo дөннабадела димачиомарес калай мадёбе ранг нгвене жубдебе ки димай мебарес семги дөннабе рашинла дималева мес дөннабе рашисуде сем рашин жубе тонба калай ма ранг нгвене жубе тонба자와 데니 тонбадела 아니 가소레 димачиомарес dönebe rāshīngi rāshīn tēla dīme lēba shūyō mās, lēba mēba rēs. Lēba sī na dā dīne ya tērē tāngshī, dīne nyamdō, ya dīnā lē dīne ki dönebe simgi rāshīn yīngkē, dīme yīngkē chīyō rūpē sī ne dīyō mā rēs hor dā.
Here His Holiness is commenting on what we looked at last time, the verse from Sublime Continuum. So looking at the first sentence, or the first line, thus not only is the ultimate nature of the mind unpolluted by contaminations, so the ultimate nature of our mind and the mind of the Buddhas is identical, in that it's empty of being established by way of its own essence. In other words, the stains are not, or the contaminations are not to be found anywhere within the very nature of the mind. The nature of the mind, it being empty of existing by way of its own essence or nature, is unpolluted, is free of all stains. And there is no being whose nature of their mind is polluted by stains. Not a single being. All sentient beings. Just like the Buddhas, the nature of their mind is unpolluted, untainted by any trace of contamination. And therefore, ultimately, in the final analysis, all our minds, the minds of all beings, are empty of being established by way of their own essence.
semgi dönne be rajin sede semgi dönne basne tongba semgo rajin tu tongba sigurwa jisan semgi dönne be rajin la de sem kala ya ma de ba rang ngweni ma tu ba sigurwa jisan semdi sem korong ngweni su korong dönne ngweni sugi rajin de kan de la na kala ya ma de ba rang ngweni ma tu ba de sigurwa ma tu ba de sigurwa 세상다 셈 그런 우인이서 라신디 강라이마다 랑원에 마주바래 데네기 라신 될래야 강라이마다 랑원에 마주바 될라 네 디마요 말레스
Just before I come to Kenna's commentary, just bearing in mind that the word ultimate has the meaning of final, as opposed to in English it can also mean the very best. So we think of it, the final nature of the mind. When one analyzes to the subtlest of levels, the final nature, the ultimate nature of the mind is that it's empty of being established by its way of its own essence, nature, or characteristics. This is the case for all beings. And thereby, the nature of the mind is nothing but limitless purity. Whereas His Holiness expressed in a previous verse is in its very essence at peace.
그래서 돈담비 라면도 다 셈디 가지고 녀마 라신이 줍디바체 다들 라신마 줍어 차와리베스 데네 말레스 녀마 호라신 줍 녀마 라신 줍 뭐냐래 다대야 라신 마주버레스 근데 마오바다 라신 줍어 연구해서 니하요 말 마오바래요 말 그래서 돈담바스도 셈 그런 아마 이나라 다다 이나라 마오베네 셈 그런 갈라에 맞여봐 랑은 주비에게 뒤지 균해요 말해서 그래 뒤수지 디네 마 냐마에 중요한 말 다녀요 말 몽반데 중고 말 매서 셈코로 갈라에 맞어봐 랑은에도 용고 말해서 다 맨한다 셈코로 간다 쉬어르시네 셈코로 현실로 되네 drupdubashire, Shenchila Dune, then drupdubashi, Mato, Shenchila Matova, Rangun, Drubadi, Mebara, Chesa Rangun, Druba, Simco Kalama, Rangun, Druba, Mebadida, Rashi, Simki Rashi, Dida, Sanyi, Simki Rashi, Chibichigades, Chesa Jivades, Chesa Dinigi, Wall, Jima Yomare.
If a phenomenon, so here we're discussing the mind, if a phenomenon such as a mind did exist by way of its own nature or essence, that would mean it would be independent. Because it would, to exist, it would be independent of anything other than its nature. It would exist only because it would exist by way of its own nature, independent, and therefore nothing would impact it. But this is not how anything exists, including the mind. Rather, the mind is interdependent or mutually dependent. And because it is mutually dependent, in the final analysis, nothing, no inherent nature or essence can be found. What we need to understand here with this usage of the word ultimate is that it's not that the mind now is found to be empty of existing by way of its own nature, but it previously did exist by way of its own nature. That is a mistake. It has always, since beginningless time, been empty of existing by way of its own nature. Also, what should come to mind with the term ultimate is that whilst the mind is now found to be empty of existing by way of its own nature, it doesn't mean that one day in the future it will be existing by way of its own nature. Not at all. It always has been and always will be empty of being existent by way of its own nature. It is not independent, but mutually dependent.
Donnabe Rashin, Senate Sim Rashing to be Tony de Sigore, Chesandi, Mazuki, Sanki Rishi, so that Mahobana, and then Mazu Sanjo Wato, the Tikar Chagres, and Kasangoni Guragi, Moni Charuko, Chesandi Sanji reading as Semja Tamji Gula, the Yodebare.
Ultimate nature of our mind, this final reality, the emptiness of our mind, that is our Buddha lineage. And it is that when we do arise as a Buddha, will be called our nature truth body. So amongst the two divisions of the Dharmakaya, or the truth body, our Buddha lineage, our Buddha nature, the ultimate nature of our mind, the emptiness of our mind, will be then called, when we arise as a Buddha, the nature truth body.
Adine Nibedilla, another Semgi Rashin, Don number Tony de la Mola Timaleva Mebaina, and the Sem Koronga, Kunzubi, Sem Koronga Mola, and Moa Serik Zamdelia, and Timeleva Yoribe, Sene, Yon Shuguru, Sebe, some Ligua. Dineza, Semdu Kunzubi, Mo, Serik Zamlayang, Timeleva Mevares. Just a Semdu Mo. Sem kunzubi sem dadi tongba yin shiga marda da kunzub sem jidang azu sem jioro ba da sem kunzub sem korong kunzube sem korong ngo sal sem ngo korong ngo de sa sem rigsam de la anu timele ba yoro besne de la timele ba yo mares.
In the first line, looking at the mind from the ultimate perspective, or at its ultimate nature, its final way of abiding, we recognize that it is empty of existing by way of its own nature, and this is uncontaminated. It's not stained in any way. Then the question comes: so that is the case then in terms of the ultimate nature of the mind, but what about its conventional essence, or its conventional nature? Is the conventional way of abiding of the mind, is that perhaps polluted by stains? So then we come to the second line, or the second part of the sentence. But the conventional entity of the mind, that is, its mere clear and mere knowing, is also unpolluted by contaminations.
nene zada semgyo ngo kunzubi sem khoro ngo sasam riksamdi ane mao bana ane nga zo tiba pangane sanjo ko ba thoyedi ishi chugo ngo gyugore teza di inza nga zuge semgyo ngo sasam riksamdi ane sanji rikres nga zuge le yore nga zuge semgyo ngo sasam riksamdi nga zuge le yore teza di nga zo mao bana sanjo ko ba ishi chugo gyure riktires 대지 되네게 셈 모사선 리즘 코롱 셈 랑신게 랑이 원에 주베 동베 동이디 아니 모바나 아니 모니고 규주고레스 제자디 산제지 산제데라 인간 저게데 모니고 대지 추고스니 딘유 모 규중기다 직팅 아주기로 요레스 고르바나 다들 또 그렇게 시험하다 아주 마음바 다들 뭐 군주에 섬사삼 직섬 되니 마 상기들이 사삼 직섬 되니 이시치고 뭐 유그레스 자디 땡게 되니게 사삼 직섬 뭐 랑신이 주베 동베 동이디 아니 뭐니고 뭐 유그레스 뭐니고 차그레스 마음바나 제상한테 상계르도 셈이 땡이 춘이디 뭐니고 차로 그래 셈 고랑 가르쳐서 이시치고 차로 그래 제사 디네서 셈 모사섬 직섬딩 아주길라 요레 디 이시치고 차야 유릭들이에서 셈이 땡이 춘이 랑신 동베 동이 춘이 고랑 당 아주길라 요반자 마음바나 뭐니고 차로 대대 릭디 아주길라 릭 디니가 요레서 뒤지 릭지단 뒤마지 릭 니 요레스 니가 만주길라 요레서 뒤지 꾸용어 규중의 리기양 안주겨 뒤마지 꾸용어 규중의 리기양 안주겨 요레서 데네자당 안주게 산지 고방 상지 고방 토에 톱투그리 사실 뒤송거래
The conventional entity or essence of the mind, which is its mere clear and mere knowing, this too is unpolluted by contaminations. When the time comes and we rise as the Buddha with the four bodies of the Buddha, the conventional essence or entity of the mind, that is what will become the wisdom truth body. This is also the Buddha lineage that we all possess. So what I presented in the previous segment and this show the two lineages that we all possess, two Buddha lineages that we all possess. The one, the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. When one becomes a Buddha, it's unchanging, it's permanent, and it is now labeled, called differently, it's labeled as the nature truth body. Whereas the conventional entity of the mind, it's mere clear and mere knowing, this, when one arises as a Buddha, is called the wisdom truth body, or becomes the wisdom truth body. And these come respectively from the two Buddha lineages that all beings possess. So these I covered last time. The first, relating to the ultimate nature of the mind, is called the naturally abiding lineage. And again, when one becomes a Buddha, the naturally abiding lineage, the empty nature of the mind, is now called the nature truth body. The developmental lineage, which is the conventional entity or the conventional essence of the mind, this, when one becomes a Buddha, this develops or transforms or changes into the wisdom truth body. The first is permanent, the second impermanent.
네네 자다 셈기 땡기 춘이디라 랑신 내릭세 고 랑신기 내릭세도 고 랑신기고 규단진 라마되바 규단진 라마되바 지다마되바 땡지 땡제 샤래 되고로와 이나데 규단진 라마되바 이제 랑신기 내릭세 고 셈고로 랑신 내릭 말해서 셈디가 그래서 규단진래 되고로와 규단진래 되는 기고요 봐서 셈고로 랑신 내릭세 책이 말해서 다 셈들라 아주 셈들라 칼라고서 예유리 리클라고 예벌 유리 그래서 나 샘디 냠는 지기지라 샘디야 뉴벌 마선 쳇쳇쳇쳇 유화다 유네 나 사요고 봐 이시추고 뭐 유인자 그 예벌 유릭스야 예발네야 고네고도 패드시고 예벌 유릭스에서 다 라신닉스야디 샘팅이 중이디 그런 오고네 변에 야르야르 친해진 데니스 요마다 샘기 홍오 공배도 샘 그런 오 공배도 쳐야야 줘도 샘기 땡게 라신기 라신 충이디야 다 오니고 교야야 타니야 자디고 처음마도 고 공배도 패셔야 돼요 말 매발로 와다
The naturally abiding lineage, naturally abiding Buddha lineage that we all possess. This is the final reality of the mind. It is permanent, so it's therefore not dependent on causes and conditions. It is still dependent rising, but not dependent on causes and conditions. It does not change momentarily, it is unchanging. The mind itself, though, is dependent on causes and conditions. So now I'm referring to the conventional essence of the mind, not its final nature. The conventional essence of the mind, it's clear knowing, this certainly is dependent. The nature of the essence of the mind is dependent, or the mind itself is dependent on causes and conditions. Therefore, it is not of the naturally abiding lineage, which is permanent, but it is of the second type of Buddha lineage, the developmental lineage. When, in the introduction to our class tonight, I mentioned how to spiritually develop and eventually become a Buddha, what we need to do is transform our mind, change our mind. This then is referring to the conventional essence of the mind, the developmental lineage. It is this that develops or changes into the wisdom truth body. So these, when we talk about strengthening our habituation to wholesome minds, weakening our habituation to unwholesome minds, this is all possible because of the impermanent essence of our mind, and this conventional entity is the developmental lineage that eventually develops into the wisdom truth body. Developing, it is clearly impermanent. To be able to develop shows it changes, and changes momentarily. So it's the developmental lineage is impermanent. Whereas the final nature, the final reality, the journey of the mind, the emptiness of the mind, this doesn't change. This is permanent, it's unchanging. And that there is the naturally abiding lineage, abiding, showing that it's unchanging, whereas the other lineage, developmental, shows that it is changing, it's impermanent.
제산다 가지고 가지고 삼다베네 가지고라 가려요레 셴래 가지고야 제외 삼바다 잠재게 삼바지 가지고 요요로 왔다 그 뉴버 치주는 막베기 마도 가지고 제외 삼바요레 안 잠재게 삼로요레 아니 지게 아니 가지고라 야도 그 넘버 집이 셰라베야 요레 제소 아니 가지고라 제외 삼바디 디모 바나 산이 이시추고 뭐 규run기 다 계규식으로 차고로 나 세외 샘비기 땡기 춘이 샘 제외 샘 라싱이 주변 동배 동이디 다 계규식으로 차고로 제가 아주 삼다베나 다디 샘전 탐지기 규라 샘전 수이네 한 제외 삼바도 요요 바로다 랑이 부글을 제 샘제 둔조에 나랑이 부글 제와요래 랑이 밤뭐 지기 소수게 쪽벌 제와용 그래 디멘베다 소소랑게 랑을 제와용 그러 와다 샘제 수이네 랑게 랑을 제와 소소 야고 차야게 제와지 요로 와다 이제 디네자 샘제 탐지길래 제외기 제와 제외 삼로디 개취중 누버 치중마다 제외 삼바라 거 요요 바로와 이제 디네자 제외 샘기 라신 주변 동바디다 라신 내릭 디네 저 상기 구용어 규로 대대 제외 삼바코로 저 라신 뭐 규를 릭스야 돼 어느 샤나 디고로 와되네시 내가 저 라바라바로 삼다네
these two lineages, all beings possess, which means the nature of mind of all beings is empty of being established by way of its own essence. Hence, all beings have the naturally abiding lineage. This is the final reality of the mind of all beings. Ordinary, like ourselves, bodhisattvas, Arya bodhisattvas, and Buddhas too. This is the naturally abiding lineage, and in the case of a Buddha, it is the nature, truth, body. For ourselves, ordinary beings like us, we also possess the developmental lineage. The developmental lineage is the conventional entity of the mind. And this is what develops through the cultivation of causes. We all have on our continuum the seeds of compassion, of love. We all have a tender heart. We also have seeds of wisdom. So this is the same for all beings. All beings. Everyone here, everyone watching at home, your children, your parents, everyone you've ever met, human or animal, all have these seeds. But being impermanent, as they are part of the developmental lineage, or being impermanent, they vary in terms of strength. But all beings have these seeds of love, compassion, wisdom, and so forth. All beings have them. They do vary, though, in terms of strength, but all beings have them. So this very coarse, very straightforward presentation of Buddha nature, I encourage you to reflect on, to see your potential and the potential of all beings.
Anda kunzu bigi semji kunzu bigi mo sasam riksam de time leba mebare sidi na delia aninga chuge da toparo samlu tinguro da bene decha konro ngaja chasan jisu nyomo barwa je kunzu be semro da chasan jisu ya no ji sarike ribaro sashin ribaro and jisu and ya sanji ke sal to go maobana ishichu chagor be sibe that dobali go some ligore chasan dine za and mo disugu control dang dechagu mo la ya and mutima yo maribes timbale shu yo maribes da shu mena and maobana sanyogo manro sanyogo ma chagiri was jide shu ba in labna and kunzu bige semji mo sari zamla and timbale ma shu ba la do was jazada contra da decha dige kunzu be semla was orda jazada diso ganesh es nadat duschene and dobali gore.
Yeah, then the question arises. So I recognize that beings have the seeds of virtuous minds on their continuum, and there'll be a variety of strength amongst them, but those seeds are there. And I understand that these can be developed into the state of perfection, the perfected love of a Buddha, the perfected compassion of a Buddha, the perfected wisdom of a Buddha. But what about the afflicted seeds, the seeds of the afflictions that are also on our continuum? Our attachment, our anger, and so forth. These two are, when the minds ripen, these are conventional minds, they are clear and they are knowing. So, what about these minds? Do they and their seeds also develop into the state of the perfected state of a Buddha? Does a Buddha arise with perfected anger and perfected attachment? So this then would be a question that would arise.
Dineza da mo bana diso ene ishishu mo yugu yo baina an jige nyomo ba bango ro kondo meba so go ro jeda deji jamje de ge de ko mo gon ne gon to person ya gonpe de dang jin ne ya sanje ishishu mo yugo ro ba kondo de gang zu ne nyembo de meba so go ro ba kondo da de cha da nga ya de nyomo brik cha sang ko meba so go ro ba meba so ba ne kondo de nyomo meba so yo de ngo sanje sale dress ko ko meba so she go ro jeda sanje go ko sanje ishishu mo dress ka yo ma ro jeda meba za da deso ane chikos ka meba so go to as meba so za ane ko ju ti control da ane ka so de nyomo be rāshīng yu tūpi tōngpa, nyōmo bē tīngi sēmki chūngi yorwa, nyōmo tīngi chūngi tīyā, ngō nīgu ngō nīgu gyūru yāyō marwās. Chēsā tāngā tīsō, rāshīng nīrik sēdi marwē sēchi tīli yorwa dā. Rāshīng nīrik. Tēshī sēmki tīngi tōngi tī rāshīng nīrik inlārwa. Chēsā indā kōntō tīngi, kōntō rāshīng yu tūpi tōngpa tōngi tīyā rāshīng nīrik rēbē, tēshāki tīngi tōngi tīyā rāshīng nīrik rēbē. Tēne inā rāshīng nīrik inā ngō nīgu gyūru kōgurwa. gyur고 gyāyā mēbā tē kōntō khōrō mēbā sōshē kīrwa jirī, kōntō pāngu kōrwa, mēbā sōyō kōrwa, kōntō mēbā sōyō kōrwa sā dīgī tīngī kōntō khōrō mēbā sōyō tē kōntō kī rāshīng tūpē tōngbā tē yā sāngyē īshī ngōnyi wī gyurā yō mārvās, chī sā tēne yā sā kāntā sī rē sā tēne kē samlō līg rō tō nām tōkpā rōshī.
Doubts like this and others are important to investigate, because the process here of reflecting on Buddha nature is to see ourselves as we really are. This is why I've encouraged you to take this knowledge and use it in your meditation. So in order to become a Buddha, the process is as follows. We need to accumulate and purify. We need to accumulate wholesome minds, habituate ourselves to them, strengthen them, and purify or eradicate unwholesome minds. This is the process to develop our mind into the mind of a Buddha. This is the process of personal transformation or development. So then another doubt may arise. The final reality, the journey of the mind, this is permanent and unchanging. And this is the naturally abiding lineage. When one arises as a Buddha, this now is called the nature truth body. All minds are empty of existing by way of their own essence. Understand, in the previous, when the doubt was answered, that the conventional essence of the mind means that we need to develop the wholesome minds and eradicate the unwholesome minds. But these unwholesome minds, these afflictions, their final reality is empty of existing in the way that they appear, just like wholesome minds. So if we eradicate them, what does that mean? Because we're eradicating minds whose nature is the naturally abiding lineage. And what about when we become a Buddha? We've been eliminating these minds. These are supposed to, their nature is supposed to be arising as the nature truth body. So surely the nature of the afflictions should be part of what arises as the nature truth body.
직다 수수기 세셔를 지도 가르치고 그러시네. 지난 컨트롤다 뇽몽베리 강인바디 뇽몽베리 빼는 컨트롤 라싱 주 컨트롤 거랑 라싱 주비 동바레베 동바레 지난 컨트롤 거랑 강라마 랑문의 주비 동바레 지난 컨트롤 강라마도 랑문의 주비 돈네베 라싱 동바니 데라 디마슈여베슨 디말레바 여베슨 디말레바 요마레 해지레 디말레바 요마레 이내야 컨트롤 라싱 주비 동베 동이디 라신들이 말했고 뭐니고 규야요 말했어 뭐 자기 말에 인자들 그 라신들이 말했어 다 가르치는 뭐니고 그 규야요 말을람나 콩도 코론 뒤에 동식이 최전 동시 콩도 코론 이시슈 규야요 말했어 이시슈 규야요 말했어 진짜 그 이시슈 규야요 말 그래서는 콩도 코론 매워서 그랬어 진짜 그 매워서 되고 이시슈 규야라 셈디 오 원내공도 팔 땅전에 야야야 다지 수규고 마도 그 매바서는 오니고 이시고 교야요 말 매바서 뇽몽베리 간인바디 이시고 교야요 말 가서 그 매바서 요걸 방고 그랬어 그 매바서 요거 가서 뇽몽베리 간인바디 이시고 교야 매바래 지 뇽몽베리 간인바디 양오 원내공도 폐 이시고 교야 매바인자 뇽몽베리 간인바디 띵이 중이 되게 찾아 라신들이 말해서 그러다.
Again, it's a good doubt to have, because as with good doubts, there is some truth in what is being said. All our afflictions are their conventional essence is they are clear and knowing. That's correct. Their final reality is that they are empty of being established by way of their own nature or essence. So that is no different from any other mind, whether wholesome or the mind of an ordinary being or a Buddha. No difference. Also, the final reality of the mind, of an afflicted mind and a wholesome mind and an enlightened mind, they are all uncontaminated or stainless. No difference. However, so there we can see in this doubt where it's coming from. There is some validity as a basis to this question. But the misunderstanding is that whilst the final reality of an afflicted mind is no different from the final reality of a wholesome mind, that emptiness of an afflicted mind is not the naturally abiding lineage, because it does not become the nature truth body. Why? Because at the time of arising as a Buddha, that affliction is non-existent. Therefore, there is no final reality of any affliction that can be called the nature truth body. And why is there no affliction at the time that one arises as a Buddha? Because in order to arise as a Buddha, the afflictions have to be eradicated. Therefore, we can also understand from this that whilst afflictions such as anger are clear and knowing, they have the same conventional entity as any other consciousness, they do not develop into the wisdom truth body. So therefore they are not considered a developmental lineage, because they must be eliminated or abandoned, destroyed. So therefore, because they must be eradicated rather than developed, they are not considered part of the developmental lineage, despite their conventional entity being the same as a wholesome mind, and despite their final reality being the same as a wholesome mind. So therefore, because an affliction such as anger doesn't develop into the state of Buddhahood, but is rather destroyed, it is not of the developmental lineage, and therefore cannot become of the wisdom truth body, and so too its final nature, final reality, whilst empty, is not called the naturally abiding lineage, because when Buddhahood is attained, the mind that is empty, that afflicted mind, does no longer exist.
Nyomo bada nyomo be sabana nyomo be bacha de la dimasi orda nyomo be khoran deja khonra nga yetsa nyomo bacha zada dimare desuge sabandigi dima desuge bacha digi san dimas jezada khonro khoro nyomo bare de ro jezan khol dimele ba mashu bala ya ma ko khoron dimare de ro khoron ngo le dimegi yo de ro da dima cha de jezan ko mya ba so ko da.
This term that we've had through the various verses quoted, as well as here in the commentary from His Holiness, of contaminations. This, we understand, refers to three things: the afflictions, together with their seeds, and their imprints. All three, then, we understand to be included within contaminations. So when it's said the nature of the mind is uncontaminated, it means it is free of the afflictions, it's free of their seeds, and free of their imprints. Anger is an affliction, so therefore it is to be abandoned. So there's no talk of anger becoming a mind of a Buddha, being developed into the mind of a Buddha, and therefore the empty nature of the mind of anger becoming part of the mind of a Buddha, because anger is to be eliminated, being an affliction.
On the needs other, the Simgi Dunneber Rashin, Tima Yomar, the Simgi Dunneber Rashin, Ingan Conrod, and Yomo Bakaya Yomar Sigurwada, Simgi Dunneber Rashin, Dombani Inge, Rashin Ingan, Yomo Sabon, Pacha Yomar Sigurwada, Jetta, Simgi Dunneber Rashin, and Yomotio Marese. That the Simgi, the Kunzubi Simgi Ola, Jima. Ring more sazam rigsam de la timelia majubare esidu jidang sem jidang begi sem korong and rashin more rigsam sazam de la more jimayor besin dimabare ese that sem yinna and they sem gi khabara cheje and then payawa chen dua cha dong khonro da ngaya and then marik pase desu gi rashin la ngola and then timelia ba yoro marasen di yores Timmy Mola, Timmy Leva Yores, Chesada, Timmy Mola, Timmy Leva Mashuba Meba Mare, Maleva Mare, Timmy Leva the Yodis, 그래서 되셔 호롱 디마레 콘도 호롱 디마레 지선 호롱 뭐 콘도 뭐 호롱 콘도레 되로와 되셔 뭐 호롱 되셔레 되로와 저도 디 호롱 뭐 원래 디마 예리 바레스 디메 레바 메바데 마레스 월 심세디 심지잠바디 랑신 뭐 설섬들 디메 레바 마슈 바레스 제사시에 다디나데 다디 여와 쳐바이네 셈카시엘라 뭐를 디말레바 마슈 벤 잠바 제외 삼바텔라 뭐를 디메 제외 삼바 인겐 되샤 인가요 말로 콘트롤 인가요 말에 마릭바 인가 메바르다 메바르와 제외 삼바다 레긴 넘버 집에 셰랍 코론 메바레 지사 다 되샤 콘트롤 뭐라 녀모 바레 코라서 콘트롤 뭐 콘트롤이 되로와 지사 동안 두시 여와 치키 셰바나
So based then on what has just been said, the correct way to understand the second part of the sentence, the conventional entity of the mind, that is its mere clear and mere knowing, is also unpolluted by contaminations, is in the following way. So now bearing in mind the meaning of contaminations, it means afflictions, their seeds, and their imprints. So this sentence we need to understand as it refers to or relates to mind in general. Mind in general. Because if we take an instance of mind, this sentence will be concordant or agree with particular illustrations or instances of mind, but not be concordant or be in disagreement with other instances or illustrations of mind. Take, for example, the conventional essence of the mind of compassion. Its clear and knowing is, as we have here, unpolluted by contaminations. Compassion, its conventional essence, is not contaminated, in other words, by afflictions, their seeds and imprints. But another type of mind, an afflicted mind, such as anger or attachment, its conventional essence, its clear knowing, is contaminated. Because it is an affliction. So therefore, it is contaminated because contaminations include afflictions, seeds, and imprints. So therefore, afflictions are polluted by contaminations because they are, being an affliction, contaminated. So this sentence there, therefore, the second part, the conventional entity of the mind, we need to understand, refers to mind in general.
야 셈기 군주병오 사점 릭섬들라 지메 레바 마슈바레 세비기다 셈기 군주병오 사점 릭섬세들라 모여송다 다 대신에 받은 셰바데 가체 다야 삼당나 찍레 고 가르고 모여송거스네 아 저게 셈 차쇼들이야 이기 셰바 셈 차쇼 중국어와 지상한 주게 이기 셰바 셈 차쇼디 그디응은 유고라나 아 저게 여대래 셈 차셔대 간주 열 다된 원도 규려 마디나 여대 바래 만주기 다 시로치도 갑라 만주기라 원도 규고 제자다 만주기 이기 셰바 베네 셈 차셔 지어로 와다 차셔디 니 대랑 올라다 되샤 인게 요 말에 되샤 요 말에 컨트롤 요 말에 녀모비리 가야메 바래 제자다 군주비 셈모 사섬 릭섬스도 군주비 셈이 차신 차위에 차셔 뭐 사슴 직섬 딩올라 데라 디마요 마레스 디멜레바 마슈 바레스 다 되샤잉가 요마 컨트롤요 니가 메바레스 제자디 단 디멜레바 마슈 바르시도 셈디 군즈비 뭐 사슴 직섬 세야데라 뭐에 손나데랴 셈디 차쇼 찍랴 나도 이기 셰바 근데 지 차쇼 직섬 왕셰다 데네게 또바 차상 가이 이기 셰바 차쇼 려 저로 차신 차바디 당한 저 육미 셈세 저로 봐 어디 데라 고전에 군주베 뭐 사슴 직섬 삼 데라 삼 다시 디셈데라 아니 지멜레바 마슈바레 레바요 마레스 다디 사기기 셈당아스 지바르 가소레 나 지멜레바 마슈바 지바 차데로 마슈바레 에사지 두스체네 삼다제 지다 두스체네 데레요 고야지 삼다나 지용 거래
Staying with the same sentence on the conventional entity of the mind. So what I've just presented, how some minds, their conventional entity is is contaminated, this is correct. And some minds are not contaminated. So when referring to mind in general, we'd say its conventional essence is uncontaminated, but there certainly are instances, namely the afflictions, where the conventional entity of the mind is contaminated because the mind itself is contaminated. It is an affliction. But so this is correct, but there is a deeper level of understanding also to bear in mind. Our subtlest mind, the subtlest level of mind, it's called the fundamental mind or innate mind. The subtlest level of mind, that's non-manifest for us. At the time of death, it manifests then as all the coarser levels of consciousness dissolve. Finally, then, the subtlest level of mind manifests for us. So this subtlest level of mind, its conventional entity is uncontaminated. So this is the other way to understand this part of the sentence, that the conventional entity of the subtlest level of mind is uncontaminated by afflictions, seeds, and imprints.
Semgi donne be rashindile dima mashuba, and Saji semgi donne be rashin dima mashuba, and Azu semgi donne be rashin dima mashuba, chiba. That Saji semgi kunzubi semgi more sasm risam dea, timimel leva mashubare, Nazu gugi, and the kunzubi semgi more sasm risam dea, timil leva mashubare, chiba chaswa. Then Saji said, Kyun Kasore, Gangakuni met again. I also look at my answer as a tell you, I catch about it. The same you don't ever rush in the Chigbaresha, Kunzu simply rashing more such and Rixam dear. The Chigbaredo, Timelia, Mashu, Chigbaresha, and that now the Sangila digging getting the thought of Dewa, Shandi Pusu support troop together. Now to getting the Duayon again, Shandun parts at unit. Pusu support to the Shandin chooses and do like a lack of a child. You do the Karakava show, I said.
Meditating well on this and any topic, and questions arise. But how can this be so? Especially here where we are striving to really come to know how we exist in reality. Then this is fundamental to us, our self-identity and so forth. So we need to look carefully. Here what I've presented is that the ultimate nature, the final reality of our mind as an ordinary being and a Buddha's mind is identical, no difference. So too, though, is the conventional entity of the mind of an ordinary being and a Buddha. It's clear and knowing aspect. So the conventional entity and the ultimate nature of the mind of an ordinary being and a Buddha is identical. But our experience, our lived experience, this cannot be as good as it gets. It cannot be Buddhahood because we encounter so many problems, difficulties, and we suffer. But a Buddha abides in lasting happiness, unchanging bliss. When we try and be virtuous people, wholesome people, help others, meditate and develop wholesome minds, we encounter difficulties and problems such as distraction, fatigue, and so forth. Many problems. It's difficult to develop our mind. It's difficult to benefit others. A Buddha doesn't have any obstacle from the side of the Buddha. The obstacles are just from the side of the sentient being. So how can this be if the ultimate nature of our mind is the same as well as the conventional entity?
Sangi Simju Kunzubiki, Simju Mo, Sergeant Rixam de Antime, Leva Mashuba, and Azu Simji, Mo, Sasam Rixam Time, Leva Mashu, Chiba Rede, Karakaba Yoresene, Narazugila, Timolobogi, and the Tum deores. Sangi Gidi, Dimolobogi, Chasan, Nimpotenji, Mamma Sarista, Jalan Pene. Dulol mason the Kisel mason delia topo kush, but Chazan Zamasus and the Segan Charua. Nanzu the Zamasua Hadia, the Chizan Mola, Kevra Meba in there, 로버기 디미기 징도야 상하라 주기라 제가 상계기디 당보와 상계디야 가서나 로버기 디미 징도 버데 다디 냠len 제제 로버기 디마 차상 매바 상모스 산에나 견 함제 빵 차원자 아니 디기 폰수 소바다 현재 폰수 소바 주투에 차고라스 나한테 가리 중화에 견쇼고라스는 로버기 디마 망고지 규단 긴 데네제레 데네 디마 망고지 녀모모 망보지 깨지 디게 파 둠제네 아 저기 강아디티고 제가 디가 저 같이 왔은 진짜 로버기 디마데 영화 또 상마서 고리 디메바서 고리 해서 그렇다 로버기 디바세데 대샤 콘도가 녀모 비릭티기 시고로 봐
So the nature, the final reality of our mind and that of the Buddhas is identical, so too is the conventional essence, conventional entity. Both, this is the clear knowing, both are uncontaminated for ourselves and Buddhas. The difference then is, though, that whilst the conventional entity as well as the nature of our mind is uncontaminated, our mind remains obscured by the afflictions. Our mind is obscured by the afflictions. But these afflictions are adventitious, which means, maybe clearer, they are temporary. Hence, those who have arisen as Buddhas have done so because they have eradicated those afflictions which are temporary. Not only the afflictions they cede so that they cannot arise again, as well as the imprints or the stains, the slight obscurations that the afflictions and their seeds otherwise leave behind. All three of those, three levels or parts to contaminations, a Buddha has eradicated. And why could a Buddha do so? Why is this possible? Because these afflictions are adventitious. They are temporary. Recognizing this is crucial, because that means our Buddha potential can be fulfilled. It's not mere theory that yes, we can become Buddhas. This is how. It's those adventitious afflictions, seeds and imprints that we need to eradicate. And this we can all do.
제가 되네 장아 중요모디게 로보와레스 로보와라도 코스랑 신기 당보 이네 코 규디바 많이 봐제 규단 견지를 초원도 규단 견지 태도 초바되네 아니 요모베 기용고레스 제가 곧 아니 규단 견디메나 요모바데 리고 말스 베나가서 콘트로시네 콘트스케 발라 콘트게게 유지고고레 유디고고레 다 유디原나양 아는 가서 난게 견 안델야 투미이지가 로디메나 안데티 유 콘르게 유연나양 안델야 콘르기고 말해 투미이지세네 파 마게위 나바 되게 수르와다 되지루와 그래서 투미이지 난게 투미이지가 로지당 콘르기게 유의 치료가 유지 고거래 아니 나중에 투미이지게 로 유연나 유 콘르게서 유면나 콘르게야 말아 제가 콘르게서 유지연나야 소수길로 투미이지로 난게 긴 투미지로 되면은 콘르기도 말. 제가 콘르기에 발라 유단 겐치 겐나 난기 겐그 니가라 되네 콘르 레용고래. 제가디 데니기 콘르데 매바 차발라야 데니기 유단 겐네 마산의 콘르기고 말해. 근데 콘르디 로보 유단 겐래 되네 깨와서 콘르 매바 써야 유단 겐래 되네 매바 써야 요래스. 저도 그래서现在出名嘛也不进嘛没呢，看到这个语句要不然看到这个嘛的啊，出名这现在马个人呢把手切个了，对，可出名这一度我在那边找到不了是吧？现在一拍看到这完了，一度我在那边找到不了，查完这完了语题了。个人年岁低了，老板找到不落的是我最明显是个，年龄是离个。现在年龄在看到结完了，遇到难给见最明显了，说吧，你个厂的结果的，你个马上的进马上呢，你结出来看到结果嘛，掉下来他的，我都现在车上就都是过过，现在遇到见下来的结果，这个萝卜话的是，遇到见里面的结果嘛，搞不来结完，搞不来没结完的是萝卜话，店家给的那也有把它切过嘛，这就是我的。
That afflicted minds are adventitious means they are not inherently existent, or they don't exist by way of their own nature or essence. Rather, they are dependent on causes. If they existed by way of their own essence, they would be independent. Causes would have no impact on them because they exist by way of their own essence. They don't arise dependently on causes. And if they existed, if they were not adventitious, if they exist by way of their own nature, if they were there, they could never go, because their essence could not be destroyed, because there would be no causes to eliminate them. So if afflictions were not adventitious, they'd be ever present and unchanging. They wouldn't get stronger or weaker. We would just always be equally, for example, angry, or always equally attached, or always equally jealous, if the afflictions existed by way of their own nature. But they do not, because they are adventitious or temporary. Rather than existing by way of their own nature, they arise in dependence on causes and conditions. And this is crucial to recognize in meditation, that if something arises dependently, we can influence it. Being dependent, being interdependent, means we can influence it. So when in meditation you recognize that something is dependent, recognize that therefore we have influence. The afflictions are dependent on causes. If those causes are absent, they cannot arise. The afflictions need an object. So let's say, take an affliction of anger. We're angry at something, a person or a situation, whatever it may be. In addition to that there is also a preceding consciousness called improper mental engagement. It's independence on improper mental engagement, or to maybe put it in clearer English, it's independence on engaging improperly with the object. So, improper mental engagement, engaging mentally in an improper manner with the object. In dependence on that, the affliction, such as anger or attachment, arises. Then how does improper mental engagement work? It serves to, and here I'll use 3 synonyms: fabricate, superimpose, or elaborate characteristics of the object. Exaggerating or superimposing faults onto an object. This is done by engaging mentally, improperly with the object. Exaggerating or superimposing faults, anger arises. Superimposing or fabricating pleasant, pleasing qualities. This is done by engaging improperly with the object. Attachment arises. So here we see that these afflictions, they are not innate to the mind, they are adventitious, which means they arise dependently on causes. We need an object that we are attached to or angry towards, but the consciousness of the affliction is preceded by improper mental engagement, which functions to superimpose or fabricate or elaborate the characteristics of the object. Therefore, recognizing that the afflictions are adventitious, they can be eliminated through the application of the appropriate antidote. This is a crucial recognition, because this means we ourselves can attain Buddhahood. We can arise as perfected beings and be of truly great benefit to others.
Sem sangandu gyurgyu yobada jusu yoyansi. Chidana nga semde sangandu gyuwa yore, gyuwa ta yore, and sogyo jusu yore. Chidana sem sangbodiki ya di sangpo di ngo gongpe du zhuaya ki nyamlen ki rinpa di ki pa jiahuo jangpa na ane kusem di ngo gongpe du ya nipa gyuru gore, ngo gongpe tangtu gore sem nganpa di ki ane ko nyenpo tenje ko ma chi nyenpo ten yon du ane ko meba chuma nipa chung tangje gyuwa tangtu gore chi sem sangan du gyuru yo pa chi sem sangpo di ki ngo gongpe du ya gyuru yo pa sem 다시 nganpa sido nga zu nyomo ba rikti nyempo ten yudu nipo chung gyurwe yo pa res chezan ju su yo re gyuwa ta yo res chezan da nyomo pa nga zu nyomo ba yo pa di meba suye chine yakbo suye ki gyuwa ta yo sugyo ta yo res chezan da sem sangandu gyurwe yo pa da ju su yo res chezan sem sangbo di ye nyamlen je rinpa kong ngo kong ni pe du da gyuwa ta yo de che sem nganpa dike deshi chakho shuk chenpo chiyo pa na dele nyenpo tenje ten gom gom chi ma nipo chung tangchi gyur chi ko meba su ju su gyur yo yo pa di meba su yo pa da du shin ju su yo pa re se gyur tang yo pa ya re se
and that we can eradicate completely our adventitious afflicted minds is presented in the final sentence in the paragraph. Therefore, the mind can become either better or worse as it is suitable to be transformed. Recognizing the importance of the meaning of the sentence is that whatever we are most habituated to is how our mind will be naturally inclined. But this habituation is changeable. We can mold our mind, we can shape our mind so that in particular situations, naturally compassion arises, naturally love arises. And where we find in particular situations, those situations serve as triggers for our afflictions of anger or attachment. Through applying antidotes, we can transform our mind. And eventually in those same situations, only wholesome minds would arise, not afflictions. We can respond then with love and compassion rather than in an afflicted way. And this is because the mind itself can be shaped, it can be molded. So therefore, recognizing this, that is through developing our habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, through that we weaken our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. And therefore, no matter how strong particular afflictions may be for us, we can have confidence that with persistent training, we can weaken those afflictions and eventually eradicate them. And likewise, where we notice a particular good quality is quite weak in us, it's difficult to generate. Again, because we can mold, shape our mind, our mind is suitable to be transformed. We can develop good qualities. All good qualities to the point of perfection.
Zanda yuwa da yuwa di gumsen garasan deji nye sheba de semge rangshin la tima ma shuba da sem yungwa sa zem rizan de time ma le ba za yuwa da yuwa de yuwa da semge rangshin la tima shu de ba da time le ba shuba da sem yungwa sa zem rizan de la time le ba shu de na ko ngo gongbe de da yuwa ma da ko me ba suya ma de me ba ro 지상 매바서 교화다 매바래 디나 진자당한 저기 배능한 저 디세도 별자데 남가야 남가서 지난 곧 배동사로 지래 지나다 찜바 먹고 계양도 가라 진남래 찜바 팁티바디 로보와레스 지난 내가 그래 곧 찜바데 파 매바서도 낭마 차는 거래스 지나다 주로지는 요마로 지나 곧 중요마도 중요마 쉬우죠래 또 진짜 샤샤베네 강삼직이야 그런 사단 탈마 팀진 주고랑 장마 차려 그래서 제상 주의를 뭐라 묘마 매바래서 제상 그 매바선 거의 두 샤샤는 그런 장마 차려 그래서 남케기 뭐래야 진 매바래서 제가 라신을 진요 매제자다 나 로블기 긴기 또비 진 팁용 걸 되이나 고도 샤는데는 그 강삼직을 진 매바차 남가데 당신 야 동사의 차도 거래 디나시다 샘게 라신리아 디마 마슈바인상 아니 고 메바서야 디마 슈바인데 메바서야 메바리 상요고가 돼야 메바리데 이네 자디 The D Gordy, that one to Simke, Gasso Simke Ranshi, Versawari, Sanji, Rick Denity, said, and then I took Gula Manalia and the Junalia, that it just said to Dungeon and the Dicor Mamusungo, Rick Sanji, Rick Dicoria. Pemang, Petan, Duem, was Beku, Duengu, and the Nigga, and Digiton, Beku, Duengu, Tone, and the Sanji, Rick Yavadan, and the Jigger. Versawari said that the Nigga, you them all down and she was soon got that.
Pay good, don't go.
No, on it.
The reason that the mind is suitable to be transformed is what's laid out in the previous sentence in this paragraph. That the nature of the mind, its final reality, is uncontaminated. So too is the entity of the mind. It is also uncontaminated. And therefore, because both the conventional entity and the ultimate nature of the mind is uncontaminated, the obscuring afflictions are adventitious, and therefore the mind can be transformed or developed into a pure state. Here, we can refer to Sublime Continuum, from where the previous quotation came. So in this remarkable text by Maitreya, he presents, as a translator, I can't remember how this is translated. In English we use generally one word for both of these Tibetan words, but in Sublime Continuum the translator uses two different words, but I don't remember these. It's been a long time. But there are 9 illustrations and 9 examples. Maybe it's like that. But those who've studied Sublime Continuum, you'll recall this. So there are 9 illustrations and 9 examples given, which are used by meditators to recognize their Buddha nature. So one of them is that of the sky. That even on days when the sky is overcast, perhaps with thick dark clouds, those clouds we know are temporary. They will pass. The weather will change, and the clear entity of the sky will again be revealed. Another illustration is that of muddied water. No matter how muddy water may be, if it's able to sit still, those contaminations will sink to the bottom, and the water will once again reveal its pure entity. So through examples such as these 2 and 16 others, then the Sublime Continuum presents in great detail a reasoning that we can use to establish our Buddha nature.
Dandala disuge karu sungudu sungore sene aranzulya ane sangye dan ngaranzu nyema dangbo ane sangye ngaranzu nachi jibares jesa jibare ne jiba inza ne ngaranzu na kyaba nyomo ba dusine shangwa chidu gyuri ba dunga mo nyonga chade dindire ne sangye di ane ko ngui jeba che semki ngui nisu de ye simju cha ha ko cheme ngeba nye 지나다 체명에 반예도 무인이 수다 샘기 교연다 연된디야 파예와 체리신 지나다 샘기 녀모 버릭 지마디기 녀모 버릭디 님보 텐하디야 하고 무인이 수다 하고 또요도 님보 텐하다 하고 그래디 곰발에 때네 안에 녀모 바 빠체 산조고 바 dob사와레스 당아 저다디 가를 하바스 당아 저 샘기 장신 무인이 수디 지다와시나 하모고 와체 로 녀모 베기 슉첨보디 디기 슈킨 제제 디장야 제수 조도 녀몽베 디기 제제 디기 가서 제수 장제 두체바인자 마서 사지고바 마투바레스 디네 장아 주이네 아 주기라 사지 리겨 사지고바 톱투 뉴바다 리겨데 바레 시장 아 주 베준 제바데 왜 짐주제 왜니서 제바 하고제 디네 녀보때 녀바인데 디마도 로보와 겐지 체는 중대 봐마도 겐메 바랑신이 주바드 말에 디마디 녀모바디게 제사는 고 겐지를 때네 ko genji le de ne chen yong wo be za genji le de ko me ba sui tu go re ji za ko nyen bo den ju ko ba le ko ba ne san ju ko ba to tu re de ne za ma ju sim ji dan zo sim le de sim ji ran xin ni lu de ya ha go wa je sim ji yuan da yuan den sim no chu yin ba dang di no chu re xia se sim ji yuan den de di ha go wa je ya wa chi wa xie de ne sim ji yuan de se ya le ya ni bo kar kar den gu du se du chi ne ha go wa je ne ni bo den gong gu re es ji san de ne za sim ji ran xin ni lu de ye ta du de ye ha go ya de ye chen bo le di do gu go re es 근데 심비라신 니루 탈도 봐 있나 심비라신 니루 탈도 될래야 로 노트 가서 셔트겐 대진신 말이 봐서야 돼 방주고 그래 디메바서 두나 디네 아저 디네야다 상기 유튜브에 사실 단 don달랍제 된 것도 디티고 왔다 디
Further reason that we can apply one of logic is that whether we take as an illustration Buddha Shakyamuni or any other Buddha, they all were previously no different from you and I, just as afflicted as we find ourselves to be. And on those dark days when one's mind seems pervaded by anger or attachment, other beings are and were in that position. Some of them, though, who were just as, at the time of being just as afflicted as we find ourselves individually right now, heard these presentations on the Buddha Dharma, reflected on them well, heard many more, kept reflecting on them, and came to realize the conventional reality, understand all the varying elements in accordance with conventional reality. For example, in our context here, that the afflictions are adventitious. Their seeds and stains are adventitious, which means they do not exist by way of their own nature, but rather are dependent on causes. Therefore, if I eradicate those causes, the afflictions cannot arise. So therefore I have to find out how to do so, what the antidote to the afflictions are. And not only find that out, but as I'm coming to understand that, apply it. So in this way, we see that beings come to develop a ascertainment or a valid cognition in relation to how things conventionally exist, and thereby apply the antidotes to, in this instance, apply the antidotes to the afflictions, eradicate them completely. And as part of understanding how things do exist, those beings who, at this point, were striving to become bodhisattvas and eventually Buddhas, as we aspire to as well, they would recognize, ascertain with a valid cognizer that the final way the mind abides is free of the afflictions, as too is the conventional essence of the mind. And knowing this, they would apply the antidotes. So therefore, it's important that we come to understand this and the other presentations really well. A mere intellectual understanding is insufficient. We need to realize it. And this is done through hearing again and again and applying it to meditation. In particular, we need to come to recognize the root cause of all our suffering, the ignorance of true grasping, so that we can apply the antidote to the wisdom realizing emptiness. And this, conjoined with bodhicitta, is how we all will become Buddhas.
dine zadang jige jige nyamlen che tangi da nyomo base di mo so che nyembo ten ha de kare sen dang jige da de dinan ma so ya de dongba ni xie de dongba ni de lo de da nyomo be zawa dinzen mari be nyembo res che za dan dinzen sabo na che ba pang ba la nyembo dongba ni de lo de me na ane de talbe ko ba denzi pang tuku maare, denzi pang ma tuku na sanyo kopa tuku maare es. Tien zada di nyumo be chasange zawa di denzi maari paare es. Di meba suya le nyembo zowo de da tongpa ki tupe shera re es. Di nanda zowo da, zowo digi, nyembo zowo digi da tongpa ki tupe shera. Yinza yu da tongpa ki toya la, tongpa ki se dindi se, se de da dindi ki 달지 10초월지나 망고라지 쉬어야 디고는 디디나데 소야데 디르와다 인자 쪼디시고다 당한 주기다 단 당보는 고간에 수는 냠는 지고를 세야디 람림이 쏘아야 자고다디 네 다디 나셔야 되고 쪼디 숨고로 다디 네가 쪼디 요야야 당보 고간은 가wan 주고를 시도 때문이야 람림이 냠는 기도는 두 시간 용고래
We're coming to recognize that ignorance of true grasping is the root cause of all our afflictions, is indispensable. And recognize, we need to understand as when it's recognized, we will know that we have recognized or realized this, as opposed to merely intellectually understanding, because of the resulting determination to come to understand and apply the antidote, the wisdom realizing emptiness. It will then be like nothing can stop us from meditating on emptiness, because I've realized this ignorance is the cause keeping me in pain. So to be able to get to this point, we have to come to realize this point comes about in dependence on an array of prior realizations. The Lamrim is laid out in the way that it is for a specific reason. In order to come to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness, one needs to develop one's mind through a progressive series of trainings. The Lamrim in English is the graduated stages on the path to enlightenment. So enlightenment's the goal. But to achieve it, one needs the wisdom realizing emptiness and bodhicitta. To achieve those, there are many stages that one needs to train in sequentially. And the reason for that is each stage serves to broaden our mind, to raise our perspective, so that we are ever less concerned with things of no value, becoming and developing an ever stronger, more powerful, transformed mind. And this comes through the prior realizations. Only in dependence on having cultivated such a mind is one really able to realize emptiness. Hence, those foundational realizations, these need to be generated in order to actually realize emptiness. So if you have an aspiration to develop the higher goals, the higher quality minds, the preceding foundation has to be developed. The mind has to be transformed in that way to have sufficient strength. So on that point, we'll conclude for the evening and continue tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.